Hello and welcome to the DocArena Podcast in association with Film Ireland. My name is Ross Whitaker, and every fortnight or so I want to dig deeply into the motivations of documentary filmmakers. How do they choose their subject material, and what approaches and strategies do they employ to fund, craft and distribute their work? In this episode I'm delighted to speak to Luke Sewell about his feature doc, Trust No One, The Hunt for the Crypto King, which is on Netflix from March 30th. This stylish thriller retrospectively pieces together the story of crypto king Gerry Cotten, who built Canada's largest cryptocurrency exchange, only to suddenly die in mysterious circumstances, taking the passwords to $250 million worth of customers' fund accounts to the grave with him. This film follows the bid by a number of individual crypto investors turned sleuths as they attempt to discover the truth of Gerry's death, which has cost them vast sums of money, and they suspect is nothing more than an exit scam. Will they be able to unravel the mystery, find Gerry Cotten, and finally get their money back? Here's my conversation with the director, Luke Sewell. Luke Sewell, thanks a million for joining me. Just to start off with, Luke, can you give people an idea of what the film is about?
Yes, thank you for having me, Ross. So basically, the film it's the story of the online investigation that sort of sprung up after the suspicious death of a cryptocurrency whiz kid by the name of Gerry Cotten. He supposedly died while he was on his honeymoon in India, and he basically, at the time, he ran this cryptocurrency exchange called QuadrigaCX, and he was the only one that had the passwords. So when his wife announced his death, actually a month after his death, all the people that held money on his exchange, I think there was $250 million Canadian dollars worth of money on this exchange. They woke up to this news and their money was seemingly locked away forever. So obviously they were horrified by that situation. Some of them had, all their life savings on it. One guy in the film had $500,000 worth of crypto wrapped up on this exchange. So we kind of tell the story of their reaction and their online investigation. The people who had money on the exchange sort of started looking into the story. They teamed up with some intrepid journalists, and they kind of basically go down the rabbit hole, really, to see, to look at the sort of underbelly of this company, and the sort of official narrative starts to unravel very quickly, and they start to have suspicions that maybe he was still alive and he'd actually run off with their money. So in a nutshell, that's the kind of story, really.
And so how did you come to be making it?
So actually, I'd made a film, part of a series called Bad Sport for Netflix, and it had gone very well. Actually, one of the commissioners sort of mentioned this idea that Minnow Films had pitched to them, and so I got involved in it that way, really. And so I went to meet Minnow. There had been a Vanity Fair article that had been written about the story in various other sort of press when it had kind of happened. And I was kind of immediately like, wow, okay, this is quite an incredible story. I sort of was very attracted to it. And so I became kind of attached. And from there was a bit more development work. And then the pandemic hit. So it kind of stalled. So it was a few months before it kind of eventually got greenlit, but then it did, yeah. So it was very much, it had been developed by Minnow, by Adriana Timko Minnow, with David Moulton and Reva Sharma, great development team there, and it just seemed, it seemed an incredibly outlandish story. It had a real element of mystery to it at the time. It had really only just kind of happened, so it was quite fresh and it was kind of live. No one really knew if he was alive or dead. There were reports that the RCMP in Canada were going to exhume his body, and it just seemed really exciting. And also, I like mysteries and thrillers, so I was very drawn to the sort of mysterious aspects of it.
Yeah, going back to Hoop Schemes, where I kind of first saw your name, even though I know you've made several docs before that, I really loved that doc amongst the Bad Sports, which was a great series as well. But one of the things about both of those docs, and Hoop Schemes, I suppose, for people listening, is about a betting scam around college basketball. And there's quite a lot to explain in it in terms of making sure that people understood how you made those kinds of bets and that you were betting on margins and so on and so forth. And in this as well. So you have these kind of unfolding thriller dramas, but you also have to explain as you go along. How do you find that process? It's always a tricky balance, isn't it? Because you want to keep the story moving, but you need to make sure people understand what's happening.
Yes, it's a good question. And also cryptocurrency. I mean, yeah, there was a big element of that in Hoop Schemes. And I think, how did I deal with it? I spent quite a few weeks sort of sketching out different graphics on the wall of the edit to try and explain how this ridiculous system works that in America people are very familiar with, but globally it didn't seem so familiar, and it wasn't familiar to me. And kind of crypto as a subject is sort of has a similar thing. I mean, I didn't actually know much about crypto at all before taking the film on, and generally the first thing anyone would ever say when I sort of mentioned to them that I was making this film and it was set in the world of cryptocurrency is like, well, can you explain Bitcoin to me? What is it? How does it work? How does it have any value? And it seemed to be this really kind of complicated subject that people were just kind of mystified by. And I think, to be honest, it's like I explained it as much as you needed to and as little as possible, really, because it wasn't really about cryptocurrency, really. I mean, it was the sort of world and the setting of Bitcoin, but actually, it kind of, if you just think, if you think crypto and just read money, that's all you really need to know for the story. But obviously, I think, crypto is a big thing at the moment and people kind of are excited by it. So we needed to obviously, address it in some way and explain things like the blockchain, but in as layman's terms as possible. And actually, when I was doing the interviews with various contributors, they're all incredibly knowledgeable, amazingly into it. It was often quite difficult to get them to try and explain it in a more sort of friendly way. And they'd often go into huge amounts of detail that I would just very quickly get very lost. So it was kind of, I mean, it sort of helped that I hopefully, like the audience, was slightly baffled by it and kind of found my feet as we went through. So hopefully it kind of in the film, you there's enough there, there's enough info there that, it works.
Yeah, and you kind of have to explain as well how the exchange works, don't you? Like how people would put their money, it's a place that they put them. But I mean, I suppose it's not that different from any other type of investing. Once you stop worrying about not understanding what cryptocurrency is, I suppose.
Yeah, if you just think of it like a bank, a cryptocurrency exchange essentially is kind of like a bank in a way, and a place where you can buy and sell it and also trade it with other people. So kind of bank come bureau de change in some way. And yeah, I think if you think of it like that, then it's sort of not too difficult to get your head around, hopefully.
So where did you start then? Because you have a number of interviewees and they come in as the story unfolds, and you have to reveal, even though you know the story in its entirety, there are quite a number of reveals along the way. And I kind of don't want to go into them too much because it's more enjoyable for people to watch them as they happen. Did you lay out the whole story on paper yourself first, or did you have to discover stuff from the interviewees as you're going along?
So I worked with an incredibly brilliant producer, Zoe Hutton, so how I like to work, less so in my old stock stuff, but in the kind of more retrospective films, where possible, I like to kind of have a bit of distance from the contributors until I'm in the interview situation with them. So Zoe was very much there, getting the story from the contributors, and would film, Zoom interviews and transcribe stuff, and would transcribe stuff together. And then I would sort of take that and I would begin to plot based on what they'd sort of told her in the research chats, and also stuff that I'd been reading in the newspapers and what have you. And also, conversation that had been happening online on Telegram, because it's a big part of the story is this sort of online investigation that unfolds on social media. I then very carefully, again with the help of Zoe, structured a story. Also, one thing that became quite apparent quite quickly was that actually the story unfolded quite quickly over the space of like a few weeks. A lot of the developments all sort of happened at the same time, and it was also multiple perspectives. So a lot of my work before shooting anything was just trying to just work out that structure.
I really noticed that you feel like the story is unfolding for different people at the same time, separate from each other. And so I thought of that as quite a tricky thing from a storytelling point of view, but you handled it perfectly. So Did you grapple with that at all, or were there things that you learned, I suppose, from trying to do that?
It was a tricky story. I mean, it was, so for example, Hoop Schemes was a much straighter story, and played out in a much less complicated way. I mean, I know there was some sort of complicated information you need to get across, but this was a lot more complicated. It was also a lot more based, there was a huge element of conspiracy theories. There were massive rabbit holes. There was, you name the theory, someone had it. So it was also like trying to find what the line is, because there was various points in the film people think he's alive, he's dead, he may have been murdered, and it may have been someone else pulling the strings. And so trying to kind of weave that into a satisfying narrative was incredibly tricky, but I kind of feel like we got there. And in terms of how we planned it out, obviously the film, you sort of write your film 3 times in a sense, don't you? You kind of script it, and when I say script it, you plan the structure and the idea of scripting a documentary often sounds completely mental, but but yeah, you have your plan, you go in with your plan, whether that's a script or beat sheet or whatever, then you kind of rewrite it again in a sense when you're doing the interviews and then in the edit. So we had kind of several stabs at this, and it was not a straightforward film to make in that sense. And it also revolved, because it needed to feel like the whole kind of vision for the film was like this online thriller that was playing out, with these multiple characters all looking into this mystery and trying to, solve it. There was also an element of certain contributors did more investigation than others. So how do you make it feel like they're all in on this? So there were various kind of storytelling challenges that were kind of fun to kind of try and resolve.
You've got a great group of interviewees. One is anonymously on camera. Another one is the sister of his partner. And you even get a feel for when she introduces herself that it was a bit of a decision for her to participate. Was it part of the development process for you to get them on board, or were they already on board when you arrived?
So a lot of them weren't on board. So there was a key. So in the development phase, the journos had been contacted and were kind of on board, and a couple of the online sleuths, Ali, and no, I think it was just Ali actually at that point. And there were some other people that had lost money that were also kind of attached. But we went through. When I sort of came on board to direct, and when Zoe came on board to produce, we did very much. We ramped it up. We had to find some more people, and one of the key contributors was QCX Int, which stands for QuadrigaCX Exchange Intel or Intelligence, and he's our anonymous contributor who you see in the film wearing a fox head mask. He was key, as he had done a huge amount of digging online and sort of, he was like a online ninja, and he took quite a lot of persuading, and that was, all credit to Zoe and her amazing ability to sort of convince him to take part, because obviously, there's a lot of sort of suspicion in the world of crypto. It's quite a suspicious world. And these guys that had lost their money had obviously, there was shame in that, and they were, feeling down about it, and they weren't particularly kind of trusting. So there was a lot of work to try and convince them that it would be great to help them tell their story. And I think a lot of them felt as well that they wanted to tell their story and they wanted to be heard, and also that there was a sense that they hadn't been heard by the authorities. And at the time when we embarked on filming it, there was very much a sense that and for some of them there still is actually a sense that they could get their money back, and maybe participating in this might in some way help or highlight the story. So yeah, there was a huge casting effort, and in terms of Kim, she came on incredibly late actually. So we actually extended the edit by 2 weeks. She wasn't in the film until sort of week 18 of the edit, and we just desperately needed someone to be a kind of a voice for Jen, Gerry's wife, particularly because she became a big focus of investor user, Quadriga users, whatever you want to call them, their attention, and Jen herself proved elusive. So it was great that Kim, was willing to be involved, and tell Jen's side of the story.
Yeah, it's very important. And one of the other things that you see in the doc is that these participants are not only interviewees, they become actors within their own story to a certain extent, in terms of utilizing other shots of them and so on and so forth. Did that come from your scripting, that you're like, I'm definitely going to need a shot of this person kind of looking like this at this point, or that kind of thing? And was it difficult to get people to sort of do that?
I mean, it's sort of, so one of the things that we filmed this entire film remotely. So I never left this room that I'm in now. Actually, one day I did, one visuals day in the UK to do some pickups. The rest of the time I was here as I'm talking to you. And we worked with multiple crews around the world to do this. I mean, it was an incredible kind of collaborative filmmaking experience, one that, was quite humbling in a way, And so it sort of, there were challenges in the way that we filmed it in terms of, it had to be, I went with a kind of really heightened, stylized approach because effectively the story was all online. It all happened online. And also we were quite limited with COVID and the pandemic. So stuff, moving outdoors was very tricky. So we could do these. So we just put so much into making it look kind of amazing and having the kind of feel of a movie, and to try and not make it feel like a sort of talking head archive, just to make it feel a little bit like, the audience was close to the action and, was on their laptop as well, following the story, investigating along with the sleuths. Sort of in answer to your question about how planned that was, we were very planned. I mean, we had to be because of the pandemic. So we would be sending camera plans to the teams on the ground, we need this setup, we need that setup. And, because of the equipment that we were dealing with, I mean, like our interview setup, everything is so, we had an art director. I mean, it was so heightened. It was complete. There was an element of the production that felt like maybe it was more akin to drama, in terms of having art directors dressing the set, the interview sets. And so the time involved in that, like, it'd be 4 hours to set up the master interview shot, and then you'd have 3 hours for B-roll at the end. And you needed to get 4 shots out of that. But each time you move the camera, you'd lose 40 minutes. So we were incredibly prescriptive about what we'd want and tried to be incredibly resourceful, reversing the set. And you know what? Across the board, the guys were brilliant. I mean, I'd sort of had a chat with them beforehand, just explaining about how we might work and how it might be like that. And they all kind of got it and were kind of cool with it. And also, it wasn't like we were asking them to do anything that they wouldn't already do. It was just sort of, but I would be directing them. I'd be sort of, could you maybe just, look over there or look out the window, or maybe you're thinking this, and just try and plant sort of, to try and get that in the visuals. And because I knew we wanted an arsenal of different types of mood shots, tension beats, whatever for the film. Because it's not like we were ever going to have reams and reams and reams of B-roll or actuality. It wasn't that kind of film. So it was an interesting process, but they were all kind of cool with it and really open and seemed to enjoy it.
It's amazing to think of you doing that remotely. Sometimes it can be tricky enough working with real people and trying. With some people it just doesn't work. You can't get them to do the type of look you want them to do and all that kind of thing. To be actually doing it remotely on top of that, I don't know if that was maybe a plus or a minus, like in a funny way. And also, it's interesting you mentioned, so it was actually shot on set. So when you're filming someone in an apartment, it's not their apartment. So maybe that creates a different sense of things for them as well.
It was a very different vibe, yeah. And, we were quite careful to just say, look, this is, it might feel weird. And obviously, if there's anything you're uncomfortable with, tell us. And I think there was, a couple of points where a couple of contributors were like, okay, we didn't quite, I'm like, okay, fine. No, totally. So, but none of it, they were all heightened versions. So all of the, we did a big location scout because we weren't in a position to, in a weird way, like the pandemic and not being able to go there just made us, we had to be so organized and so prepared. So we'd have like big location scouts, we'd sift through, me and Tim Cragg, the cinematographer, would sift through, we'd be sent 20 houses for an interview, and we'd go through them and go, okay, great. we'd have a day, a tech recce or a location recce day where we could see 3 of them, and we'd be 2 heads on an iPad being shown through a house, and then we'd have, they sent us lots of photos and videos, and then we would then very carefully talk about how it needs to be dressed, and so the whole thing. But that was the style of they're all like the newspaper office was a derelict newspaper office, which was quite an incredible set dress, to make it look. I mean, hopefully there are points where it doesn't look empty, but we had to be very careful. You needed a computer screen pulling out a sit. You could see it on one desk because if there was a corner of, you just needed a sense of other people being there. So actually, sound design helped with that, but also we just needed to be very careful about what you could see in shot, and whether or not you were just revealing that it was an empty derelict place with nothing in it. So yeah, it was really cool, But in terms of the experience of being remote and directing and the interviewing, I think I was nervous to begin with. We were, Minnow, the production company who were behind this, were so supportive, and Poppy and Alex and Rachel, who were the production management department, were incredibly supportive and just like, okay, we know this is very difficult, we'll take it each step at a time. So when we first started the interviews, none of us had worked remotely before, so it was very much a kind of learning experience. And I was quite nervous that interviewing on iPad would somehow destroy the intimacy of the interview, and people would wouldn't be able to hear me, or it would glitch or whatever. And sure, we had those kind of problems, but overall, actually, from my point of view, interviewing the contribs, I don't think it really had any significant impact. And in many ways, when you're doing that kind of this type of production, like on Bad Sport, where you've got massive cameras and it's really lit and very produced, I'd often be sitting behind a load of blankets anyway, behind an iDirect, and they'd be seeing me through mirrors. So actually, it wasn't too different. One of the things that I did find hard was just having a sense of the room. Reading the room was very difficult because you couldn't see it. I mean, we had one camera that was set up as a wide, but it just didn't really mean anything. So, yeah, a good experience and amazing. I just think, of everything we kind of pulled off in terms of what the production pulled off, I think that is some kind of achievement, because it's a very global story, and we were everywhere, working with Chinese crews, North American, Canadian. Yeah.
You'll never have to leave your room again.
Oh God, yeah, no, it's depressing, isn't it?
So listen, I mean, you've done kind of more observational, intimate documentaries. I don't know if you've shot stuff yourself in the past. I mean, it's very different, isn't it, to be doing that kind of filmmaking on this kind of filming? I mean, which do you prefer, or is it just depend?
It completely depends. I mean, yeah, my background is observational self-shot documentaries. I did that at film school. I'd made several docs for like BBC and Channel 4. I've done a lot. I've done a lot of different type of docs. I've worked at Factel Entertainment and Channel 4. This is very different, and I don't think people realise quite how different it is to obstock. And still, I sometimes find it hard to get my head around, the fact that visually you have to think about it in a different way, because you're not going to have actuality, and you're looking for sometimes shots that are more about mood or tension rather than just following a scene. And it's also sort of, they're so sync and interview driven that you just need to think about the interviews in a very different way. And I mean, with my obstock stuff, I would be, I'd be quite sort of specific in what I wanted, and not set. I mean, I wouldn't just follow stuff, And also, I'd never really done a lot of blue light stuff, so I was never really making obstocks in worlds that were where there was a lot of just unfolding drama that you just could sort of point your camera at and you'd get some drama. The kind of obstacles I was doing, I would be quite used to producing scenes, but then they would have much more of a life of their own. You'd maybe, you create not create. I don't be careful what I say here, but you sort of a scene. You sort of
kind of position.
They would position a scenario, and then it would sort of take a life of its own, and there would be a real magic that would just come out of that. But in these type of docs, there's less of that. It's much more about the sort of pre-thought, I guess, that's gone into it. But of course, there is, people, do say things that are kind of unexpected, but it's a lot more. I kind of have more of a sense of what they're going to say, whereas in obs docs, there is much more of a sense of the unexpected, which you do kind of miss. But I also love the sort of more. I love the structuring that you have to do with this kind of stuff beforehand, and I kind of learned it. I was Bad Sport at Raw. Hoop Schemes was made at Raw, and I very much I'd say I learnt it from those guys, actually, particularly like Tim Wardle and Adam there and Alex, and they that was almost like my film school in this style of making docs, and I guess I've very much enjoyed it, but it is different. So I don't know. I'd never say, it depends on the story, really.
And you really have to think it through, don't you? Because the story is unfolding, but it's already happened. So you need to make sure that you get those reveals, those beats really clearly. Otherwise, you've kind of lost that opportunity to have the twist that you need. It's almost a different type of filmmaking. It's, I suppose, sort of become a house style of Raw, going back to the Banged Up Abroad, where the people would reveal their own story and as it happened, little by little, beat by beat. But it gives you tremendous kind of control over the unfolding drama of the story that they're telling.
Absolutely, totally, and I think it's a really good skill to kind of learn, and it's effective, because essentially, Bad Sport, it's just 5 guys talking in a room. Essentially, it's the same with Just No One. It's like 12 people talking in rooms. And it's you have to be very precise about those beats and landing stuff. But that's quite exciting, and that's the challenge. And I guess I'm into it. I like it. I've been enjoying it.
Good stuff. Take me back a little bit then. I suppose we're talking about stuff you've done in the past. At the moment, we're really in a very interesting time in documentary, because in certain types of docs, it's just feels like an absolute boom, and there's so much happening. Is that something that you've observed as your career has gone along, and now, I suppose, having done these 2 films for Netflix in a row, is that an exciting time to be directing these films and the opportunities that are there with the right ideas to be making stuff that allows you to have that kind of filmmaker control, I suppose, at budgets that allow you to do the things you want to do?
It's absolutely incredible. I was saying to someone the other day, I think my first film I made Channel 4 back in 2009 or 2008, 2009. It's a completely different industry. I never in a million years would have thought that I'd be making this type of film. I didn't really even have much of a sense of this kind of doc. It was all, obs doc at the time. And obviously it's changed massively with the streamers. They have, they've been a game changer. And I feel like, it's a very exciting time. There's never been more of an appetite for content as it's referred to, or really good films. And as a director, it feels very exciting. And also, I guess I've really enjoyed working with Netflix. John and Kate there have been amazingly supportive. I feel like for directors, it's a very good place to work. They're very supportive and trusting of you, and I feel like there was a sense maybe in the world of obstock and the TV that I was doing that just go and shoot it and direct. The sort of idea of directing was sort of devalued in some way, and it feels like there's sort of the importance of directing and is sort of having a kind of renaissance at the moment. But it has. It's so changed, and in terms of the budgets as well. It's completely ridiculous. I think my first film, I made a half-hour film for Channel 4, and I think it was 50 grand. And now you're dealing with these really healthy budgets that allow you to play with all sorts of toys and and just visualize the film and conceive it in a completely different way.
So going back to 2009, Luke, then, if he was starting now, what would you say to him about navigating this industry the way it is?
I mean, when I started, it felt like there were a lot. Like Channel 4 did this series called 3 Minute Wonders. They had this strand then called First Cut, and there was kind of a ladder that you could kind of sort of climb, a talent ladder, and there were opportunities for sort of you to do stuff where there wasn't that much at stake, I guess, in terms of budgets, and it feels like those strands have slightly disappeared. So it does. It's very hard for me to say because it's just a completely different industry. But the thing that I'd always done, and when I was at film school, was just making stuff, and so I don't think I would have changed anything, particularly. Really, I think it's. And actually, like, I think Netflix is, there's a scheme I think they've run at the moment. Actually, a young chap that I sort of mentor, the NFCS, he's actually just graduated, and I think he's just been accepted onto a Netflix sort of short film fund. So there are things like that out there, and I guess you just got to plug away at those kind of things, like like you always do, really. Make your own stuff. I think being able to shoot is really, really important, and still, that is, the backbone of docs on TV. Observational documentary hasn't gone away, and I have a feeling it will come back again as on these streamers. I guess maybe the harder thing with old stock is it's harder to sort of predict, because you're taking a bit more of a risk, because it hasn't all happened. Whereas retrospective stories, you have more of a handle on what the story is, and I guess they're less risky in that sense. But yeah, I don't know. It seemed very exciting to me back then, and it seems very exciting now. So
I wonder if now it's that if you were maybe starting out, you would be looking for someone to really make more of a visual statement, because when there, I suppose, are opportunities out there, like there are, people are looking for directors maybe that can make a statement, whereas before maybe it was a little bit more about, and still is about, storytelling, but to separate yourself, to do something that's kind of like I just wondering, as I think about it, a visual statement that sort of says, look, I can do a documentary, but I can make it look amazing. If that might be appropriate in a way, or excite people in these bigger budget doc spaces.
It may well do. It's hard to know. I mean, I always think that I still am of the feeling, though, that it's about storytelling ultimately, and your grasp of that, and your ability to embrace that and push that, actually, more so than the visuals. Because I think that I wouldn't say, I felt like my self-shot stuff was decent. It looked, but it wasn't like, I don't think it was sort of setting the world on fire. It wasn't changing the narrative in terms of filmmaking or anything. And I think that working, doing bad sport and working with people like Tim Cragg, who I learn a lot from, in terms of actually thinking about turning the visuals up to 11 or 12, and just thinking about things in a different way, was really helpful. So I mean, yeah, it's not going to hurt, is it, if you've made this incredibly visual film? But I do think ultimately, actually doing this type of stuff, you really need to have a really strong grasp of the story, because otherwise, I think you're gonna struggle, because they are so tight. A lot of these stuff. I mean, maybe there's a sense that there's too many of them, but they're so tight in terms of the storytelling.
I keep hearing Tim's name everywhere. He must have somehow managed to clone himself and work on several projects at a time. So maybe the remote thing has helped in that regard.
He's always working, man. He loves it, that guy. No, but he's great, and it's sort of, I mean, no wonder. I mean, he's I mean, an amazing cinematographer to work with, and actually, one of the things, going back to the remote shooting on Trust No One, I mean, there's no way that we could have pulled that off without Tim. I mean, we were working with some incredibly talented, sort of, drama DOPs, and out in the States and Canada and China, but I needed Tim. Tim was amazing at helping make sure that the film had a unifying look to it, and also just communicating with I've got my relationship with Tim, and Tim kind of knows what I like and what I want, but it's I don't have the sort of language to be able to talk to DOPs in the way that he was, and he was very he was directing the DOPs in a very incredibly sort of intricate manner. He had obviously they have their language, their DOP language that he was able to kind of communicate, and that was amazing watching him work, and also incredible for those guys that they were so patient to work like that. And actually, one of the things we were worried about is DOPs working with other DOPs. I mean, that's not really a relationship that generally happens, But actually, a lot of them had done sort of, second unit and Steadicam on big feature dramas and stuff. So it worked well, and they were incredibly patient and like a joy to work with. So it was amazing in that way.
And tell me this then, in terms of this kind of new world of recent years, in terms of the types of projects that can be done, has that changed the kinds of projects that you now think about doing?
Yes, it's completely changed it, and also the world has got smaller in a sense. I'm getting contacted by people in America about projects, and also sort of agencies about representation, and also sort of more of a push to generate my own stuff, get that off the ground, have more of a stake in that. So it has changed things massively. And in terms of the stories, yeah, I mean but I think you have to stick to your guns. I'll often get several emails about various different stories, or want to do this project, it's going to be it's for this streamer, and everything sounds kind of amazing, and I'm sure it kind of is, but I guess you have to stick to your guns in terms of what it is about, why you should be making something, or what it is about that story that makes you want to make it or draws you to it. And as long as you stick to that, I don't think you can go too far wrong. And I guess that's what I always try and do, really. But it is exciting when various people get in touch and offer you these kind of things. But yeah, I mean, I guess what's been exciting, and what I've really loved about making Trust No One, and actually like why I've really liked working with kind of Netflix at the moment, is these stories that feel like they wouldn't have existed like 5 or 10 years ago. Like Trust No One is, I mean, it just wouldn't have happened 10, 15 years ago, and that's quite exciting. It feels like you're making something very contemporary, and at the sort of forefront of something like that. So I'm kind of still in the market for that kind of territory, and that's sort of where I'm looking going forward.
Okay, then last question. In terms of putting your work out there, then when you're on, I interviewed filmmakers who made The Tinder Swindler, which was, obviously a huge success. And I think the last time I looked at it, had over 50 million views around the world. It's incredible. And you just think of how global these films become when they're on a streaming platform. How's that been from the point of view of, you're making a film and that there's potentially hundreds of millions of people that could today choose to watch it? It's quite mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's completely. I mean, I try not to think about it, to be honest. It's really cool. It's amazing. I mean, you want to look. I like telling stories, and I want to kind of please an audience. I have quite simple motivations, really, and so reaching all these people is really appealing. But also, I guess at the same time, really, it's all about my mum watching it. But yeah, I mean, it's incredible, and just I've used to be doing stuff for the UK market really only, and to be able to do stuff that has a global audience is a privilege. I mean, that's, I think, what we make this stuff because we want it to be watched, I think. So yeah, but it's also daunting. But hopefully, let's hope it does as well as Tinder Swindler. Fingers crossed. If we get a fraction of the love that had, I'd be very happy. And if my mum likes it, I'll be happy.
Well, listen, best of luck with it. I hope it does as well as the Tinder swindler. I find that hard to say, actually. The
Oh
Tinder
no, we've cursed
swindler.
it. We've cursed it now, Ross.
Well, listen, I hope it's a great film. Well done, and it's such an interesting contemporary area, and there's so many rabbit holes you had to go down, but it absolutely works, and I really enjoyed it. So I hope it does really well for you. Well done.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ross.
Thanks again to Luke for taking part in the interview. Trust No One: The Hunt for the Crypto King is available to watch on Netflix from March 30th, 2022. Thanks to Stephen Galvin and Film Ireland for supporting the podcast, and to film composer Michael Fleming for kindly providing the music for this podcast. You can find more of it at michaelflemingmusic.com. And thanks to you for listening.